Hello, good morning, everyone. It's 10:01. I think we will leave a couple more minutes, so we allow participants to access the meeting room. So in a couple of minutes, we will start. Okay. I see that we already have quite a substantial number of participants. It's already 10:03, so let's start. Hello, everybody. It's a big pleasure to have you here today for the webinar on the Late Payment Observatory, EU Payment Observatory. My name is Iker Ayerbe. I'm the project advisor in ISMEA, managing this contract. And today we will be presenting the latest thematic report on enforcement measures. Let me drive you through today's agenda. So we will have the introductory remarks by our policy and legal officer in DG GROW, Antonella Corrella. Then we will have the contractor, Cinzia Alcidi and Beatriz Pozo from CEPS representing the thematic report on the enforcement measures. And later on, we will have a discussion with three key stakeholders on the subject, that are Magdalena Zielinska from the Office of Competition and Consumer Protections of Poland, Spiros Mathiodakis from the European Builders Confederation, and Alex Fontaine from the European Big Enterprises Association in France. The webinar is planned to last 1 hour. It's also web streamed through YouTube. So this is the plan for today. And with that, I would like to give the floor to Antonella. Antonella, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much, Iker. I am Antonella Correra, the Legal and Policy Officer in DG GROW, dealing with the implementation of the Late Payment Directive and the ongoing revision of the directive. It's a pleasure to see many of you again today to this webinar, and welcome to the new persons that are joining us today. And also a big thank you to the speakers who are joining us today. The theme of today's webinar is particularly relevant: enforcement measures. What are they? I mean, it's so we have when we have been assessing the Late Payment Directive, we realize that it's a directive that has many obligations, but very little tools to make sure that these obligations are complied with. The only measures that the directive has concerns with the payment of interests when the payment is late, and the compensation, the flat fee compensation of at least 40 euros. But there are two big problems with this enforcement embedded in the directive. First of all, they are reactive. So it means that they materialize, they come in place only when the late payment has materialized. And this is already a big problem for a company, because it means already that there is a damage being suffered by the company when the payment is late. And the second problem is that these measures are not implemented at all for many reasons. When we did the impact assessment of the Late Payment Directive, we realized that at least 80% of SMEs do not claim interest and compensations when they are paid late, mainly because of the fear factor. They don't want to damage the contractor relation with their contractor. So this is why when we were designing the new regulation, it became important also to think how the obligations should be implemented. So there should be, we were worrying and concerned that there should be systems that should have a preventive, also address the preventive aspect of late payment, which means building a better payment culture as well. It's important to prevent those conditions that would lead to late payment. For example, unfairly negotiated payment terms, and other payment conditions. Also, the need to address situations, unfair payment practices that are systemic, repetitive, and recurrent. And this is a big difference as well with court proceedings, because while court proceedings can indeed offer a valid alternative, and they do offer a valid alternative, in many cases, they are not an option for an SMEs, because court proceedings require time, require money, risk damaging the contractual relation with their partners. But more importantly, they don't have this general nature. They only solve a situation that is between an applicant and a defendant. So what the examples that we will discussing today will see how, especially in Poland, they have managed to find a system that can be a response to this a best practice that can be a response to these questions that we have. So it's and in which it runs alongside the court system in Poland, of course. And we will also have an interesting discussion with the point of view from the construction sector, and from the experience from AFEP, and the experience that they have with the French enforcement sector, enforcement system as well. I would like, in closing my final remarks, I think it's important that we have this debate today, because the issue on enforcement is moving on also in other jurisdictions. The UK is currently ongoing through a system of review of its own regulatory framework to combat late payments. And as part of this review, there will be a strengthening of the role of the Small Business Commissioner. There will be a hard law that is going to be passed to make stronger the powers and give the Small Business Commissioners precisely these preventive and proactive powers to prevent the conditions to have late payments. But also Australia will going through a system to have offices, authorities, bodies that can receive complaints on systemic unfair payment practices. So, as you know, the issue of enforcement is in the provisions on enforcement are in the proposal of the Commission. This has been upheld by the IMCO committee, and we hope that in the adoption process of the proposal by the Commission, it is important that there is a good discussion on these enforcements, because we would not like to see our SMEs being treated in a manner that is more unfavorable when it comes to late payment than SMEs in other jurisdictions in the world. With that, I close my opening remarks and I give back the floor to Iker. Thank you very much. And I'm looking forward to the discussion this morning.
Thank you very much, Antonella, for your introduction. I would like just to remind the audience that you can raise questions. You have the option in the Q&A and the chat where you can put your questions. We will try to address them after each intervention, but the idea, of course, is to make it interactive. So if you want to intervene, please do so. With that, I would like to give the floor to Cinzia and Beatriz for the presentation of the thematic report.
Thank you very much, Iker, and good morning, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here today. So, as already anticipated by Antonella, the theme of today is enforcement measures. Maybe it's good to remind everyone that we published about 6 months ago in October 2023 another thematic report, and there the focus was on the preventive measures. So the idea was really to delve in depth into the measures distinguishing those which come ex ante, so preventive, and those who are focusing basically ex post, basically when the payment has become overdue or late. Next slide, please. So what I will do, I will briefly guide you through the report. The first part is really a summary overview of many of the points that Antonella has already mentioned. And then the second part, which will be covered by Beatriz, will focus on the specific experience of some countries, and this will lead directly to the discussions with the other speakers. So, enforcement measures, I mean, they basically consist of financial or reputational penalties that are imposed on the creditor in case there is no compliance with the obligations contained in the contract when it comes to payments. And really the purpose is to deter bad payment behavior on the one hand, and at the same time also to try to mitigate the adverse effects that the late payment can have in the company, so compensate creditors. And in the context of the observatory, we have tried to map all the different measures which are related both to preventive and enforcement. And we mapped almost 140 different measures. And within them, the large majority is preventive, but still there are some about 50 measures which I consider remedial or enforcement measures. Next slide, please. As Antonella mentioned, when it comes to the regulatory framework at the European level, the 2011 Late Payment Directive defined the main context. And basically, within the directive, what creditors have is they are entitled basically to claim interest for late payments and compensation for recovery cost, which is now 40 euros. I mean, being an entitlement, a right, this means that it's not mandatory and it's not automatic. So this basically leads to a situation, as Antonella mentioned, in which actually many companies do not use the right. And it's in fact for these reasons that in some jurisdictions within the EU, some countries, but also sometimes at the sectoral level, additional enforcement measures have been introduced, and this we will discuss in a moment. At the same time, some alternative measures, for instance, dispute resolution and also mediations mechanism, are being extensively more, if you want, more and more explored as a potential solution. Next slide. My last point is really to give a bit of a sense of the use of the rights which are contained into the directive. These numbers are based on the Intrum survey. So Intrum is a credit management company which runs a big survey of more than 10,000 companies across 29 member states. And basically, what they ask companies whether they have resorted at least some time to the use of the rights. And basically what it emerges from the survey is that in most countries, less than 50% of the companies, this includes both SMEs and large companies, all together, have resorted to the right. This basically points to a situation where there are clearly some limitations in the current framework, which explain also what is happening now in terms of revision of the directive and reinforcement of enforcement measures in order to increase applicability. My very last point, this was already mentioned, but there are basically two related reasons which explain such a low use of the right. And the first one is clearly the fear of damaging business relations, and this is typically more important for SMEs, which may have one large company as main creditor, and for which resorting or even escalate in a legal procedure may result in damaging business relations. But also, on the other side, this may lead to procedures which require resources, both in terms of people and financial resources, which may not be available or may be exhausted before the procedure reaches the end. So this is a bit of the broad questions, the broad context in which enforcement measures are being applied. And with this, I hand over to Bea. Thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia. Yeah, indeed, as Cynthia mentioned before, in some member states, they have gone beyond what the Late Payments Directive stipulates, and what we have done in our report is to try to identify those cases. And what we have found is that they can take multiple forms. We can find it at member state level, like in France and in Poland. We can find it only for G2B transactions. We can find it following a sectorial approach, and we can also find it sectorial at member state level, like in the case in the transport sector in Spain. So there are multiple ways of doing it, and in our report we delve a little bit more in these cases. And in fact, we have 3 case studies: one for France, one for Poland, and one for the transport sector in Spain, that you are welcome to read. I'm not gonna delve into this today, but what I'm gonna do is to mention some common features that we have found that are present in many of these on these regimes, and that can be implemented also in the future in other member states, particularly after the revision of the directive. So the first one is the presence of enforcement agencies. Also, Antonella just mentioned that there is also work outside of the EU on this in the UK and Australia. So as Cynthia and also Antonella said, companies don't use the rights to claim interest rates or recovery costs. So result, very often late payments have no consequence. So if a company is a late payer, there is no consequence for them. An enforcement agency actually monitors the market and can help solve this issue. It monitors late payments and it identifies late payers, and it can perform ex officio inspections. So not at the initiative of the company that's suffering a late payment, but directly at the initiative of the enforcement agency. And they can also impose sanctions as a result. These sanctions normally take the form of financial penalties. That means that they are normally proportional. They normally take into account things like if there is a reiteration, which will result in a higher fee, etc. Then another very common approach used is name and shame. This is basically publicly naming those companies or public administrations that are late payers. This results in reputational damage, and in fact, in the interviews that we did for this report, we were told that often it is worse for companies or public administrations to have their name publicly spotlighted than the financial penalty in itself. So it's another kind of sanction, even if it's not monetary. Another issue is another thing that's quite common is the implementation of speedier and less costly procedures. This goes back again to what's mentioned before of court proceedings being very costly, very resource intensive, taking a lot of time. So the idea here is implementing quicker procedures that are also less costly, so then it's easier for companies to actually start these proceedings. Then finally, another element I want to mention is the presence of anonymous complaint mailbox. This allows either companies or even individual people to basically anonymously complain that the company or a public administration is a late payer. We put there mixed evidence because in the interviews that we held, actually we found that in some countries and in some cases, they say this is working perfectly well. And we are receiving quite a few complaints, but in other cases, they are saying, listen, still with this, there are not many complaints are taking place. Of course, this was done to try to overcome the problem of a company that's afraid of basically suing or complaining about their clients because of fear of damaging the relationship. Then on top of that, we also found other measures that we wanted to highlight. In government to business transactions, something that we have found in a couple of cases is the obligation to public administrations that are paying late to incur in budget adjustments in order to correct their behavior, and also the freezing of funds. There was also an interesting case in Italy in the health sector in which the late payments of public administrations was tied to the bonus of the directors. So when this public administration pay late, that results in a cut in the director bonus. And I think actually they are considering expanding this. There was also a case in which the tax base of the companies that pay late is affected, meaning that the tax base increases in the same quantity that they are owing. So that's something complicated to implement because it also requires the work with the tax administration, but it's something that can be done. And then finally is the promotion of alternative dispute resolution mechanisms and mediation, which I mean the most straightforward case is the Médiateur des Entreprises in France, which can also work as an alternative, let's say, less aggressive of trying to solve a dispute with regards to payment terms. So all that said, all these regimes, most of them are pretty new. So there is not much evidence about their effectiveness. Most of it's just anecdotal, but there is already some trends that point that these measures might work. Of course, this is not something that may work in every member state, etc. Everything has to be like the specificities of every member state or every sector need to be taken into account. But these are just some measures that have been taken and that in some cases seem to be working. So I'm gonna stop there and maybe go back to Iker, and then we can start the discussion with the other panelists.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Cynthia and Bea, for this overview of the report. You may have seen that the report has been we have put the link in the chat, so you can access the report there. You have not downloaded yet. So the highlights of the report and what you pointed out, the special regimes that well, even if they're still quite recent and we don't have a full proper analysis, the first indications show that most of them are in the right track, so that they could be considered in the future most probably best practices. So I think this is a very good starting point for the discussion now. We wanted to have the different views from these different aspects. So we will have the perspective of the SMEs in the construction sector, quite a delicate sector where late payments are quite common, and also the value chain is quite long. Then we will have also the view from the Association of Big Businesses in France, where there's also an enforcement agency, and last but not least, the point of view of the government public authority in Poland to talk about their specific measures that go beyond the European directive. So having said this, I would like to start with Spyros from the European Builders Confederation. So as I said, well, you represent the European SMEs, Spyros, that are very affected with late payments. So we would like to hear from you. What are your views on the role and the effectiveness of the enforcement measures combating late payments? So I would like if you could address in your intervention a few of the points that I will mention now. So first of all, after what we heard from the report, we expect that most of your members don't really, at the end, exercise their right to claim interest. But we would like to understand what is the current situation. Also, how do you see the establishment of enforcement authorities? Would you think that this will improve the overall enforcement? And last point, if you could also tackle a little bit what could arbitration do to maybe become like an alternative to hard enforcement measures. So Spyros, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Iker, and thanks everyone for the invitation today. Very interesting findings that were rapidly presented by Bea, and I had a look at the report, and it's very insightful, and there is a lot that is described in there. So if you have time, have a look closer to the content. So yeah, many questions from our side. As you said, it's we can only confirm a lot of what was said in the introduction by Ms. Correra. We see that in practice, even though there are some options for companies to address certain aspects of late payment after it has happened, it is very rarely the case that this takes place. This is happening because of many reasons, but as you mentioned, construction is a particular sector that has a very long supply chains, in which there is a lot of subcontracting involved, and so in these subcontracting relations, it's very difficult for a small actor to go against larger actors, be it large companies especially, but even government bodies involved in public procurement. So we see that in practice this doesn't happen. It's even the case that many small companies don't even know about their right to claim the 40 euros compensation, but even when they do not choose it, because as was mentioned, this becomes then a dispute between one company and another. It's not a general problem of late payment for the market. This can destroy business relations. This can lead to a disproportionate burden administratively for the small company. And they most of the time decide that it's not worth to pursue this and to start legal proceedings, or even resort to arbitration and mediation mechanisms, which is good if they exist, but they cannot replace a robust legislative framework. To give you a couple of examples of how the Late Payment Directive and the national rules are circumvented, we see very often that there are abuses of the ambiguous term of grossly unfair that exists in the current directive in many different ways. We see that the acceptance and verification period, which is foreseen to be 30 days in the current framework, is also abused and is used as an extra amount of days that can be used to pay. We see that there are pay-if paid clauses in some contracts that are borderline legal but are being used. We see again pay-when paid clauses. And we see requests for discounts by larger actors when people actually pay on time. So paying on time can be seen as a bonus instead of being seen as something normal. And to mention also a point about public authorities, we know that public authorities very often tend to reject payments when there are small differences in the numbers in accounting. So they use tricks in order to refuse payments and then to pay later, basically. So these are some of the examples. And then to come back to your questions, Iker, I think it's very important that we keep in mind this element of business relation, because it's not some administrative procedure that is detached from the reality. It's in a wider ecosystem, and it's linked to a payment culture. And it was very interesting to see in your report that in countries where there is, for different reasons historically, a good payment culture, like in Ireland, you don't really need a framework. But then we know that in so many other countries, starting from Nordic countries to Spain to Greece, there are so many issues with payment culture. And this is something that cannot be addressed just with voluntary measures or with a measure that come after late payment has taken place. So to answer to your point on enforcement authorities and conclude, I think it's very interesting to see what you have in the report about the different cases of enforcement authorities that already exist. The Polish case is very interesting. The French example is also very useful, and even the sectoral case from Spain. And I think enforcement authorities can help indeed to reduce costs for companies, because they would not have to go to court. They can also alleviate the court system from issues that are not purely legal in their nature, and that have to do actually with transactions. And they can have a role that comes to prevent the issue. So when they can, as was I think the case in Poland, when they realize that there is consistent issues with late payment by specific actors, they act in their own right. They don't wait for people to file complaints, either with their name or anonymously. They intervene in order to prevent this from happening. And this becomes an issue of the market, not an issue of two actors having a dispute anymore. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Spyros. From your intervention, I would like maybe to highlight that what you mentioned, I think, is key, that usually using the right to claim what creates is a dispute. That is what a small company doesn't want to do. Also that the rules, how are they now? There are ways to trick and to delay a payment, as you said, maybe refusing a payment. So there are ways that we need to see how this could be improved. And then, if I got it right, you mentioned about the payment culture, that definitely has to change. But what I understood, that you said that you cannot impose this on voluntary basis. So you would be in favor of enforcement agencies, our authorities, to change the culture, among other things, I imagine, right? Indeed. Okay.
Exactly. It's something that needs to be in place, arbitration mechanisms. It's important to have it as an option, and many companies can resort there, especially for issues of lesser importance. But this is something that, again, creates, even though it's benign, it's less important. It creates a dispute between two parties. Even if it's anonymous, even if it's not something legal, that has legal implications, it creates a dispute. And so this is where an enforcement authority could come and not make this a dispute between two companies, but something that's affecting, in general, the market. It could be a little bit like, if I may stretch this, like when you don't follow the rules for health and safety. It doesn't become a dispute between one company and the state, but there is an agency that comes and tells you, look, you need to follow the rules.
Indeed, good example. Thank you very much for this last intervention, Spiros. Now, I would like to move on to the next speaker. So, Alex Fontaine from the French Association of Large Companies. As I mentioned before, France has an enforcement agency and also extra enforcement measures. So I would like to hear from you, what is your, in your experience, what is the effectiveness of the national promoted enforcement measures? And as well as you represent large businesses, which are often identified as the ones with more difficulties in complying with payment terms. What do you see? How is the situation in France, and if there are any points that should be considered by regulators when legislating and developing enforcement measures on late payments? So the floor is yours, Alice. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Iker, and thank you to SEPS for the invitation. I think maybe briefly on AFEP. So as you said, we are the French Association of Large Companies. We represent, as of today, 117 of the largest companies operating in France, Europe, and worldwide. And we are also active members of the French Observatory on Payments. We are very involved, I would say, on both sharing good practices and spreading awareness on daily business life for administration and stakeholders, and also on trying and understanding and explain the situations that are faced by large companies, which, as you said, are still facing a lot of issues. And when you look at the number of the European Observatory, but also the French, you can see that there is an ongoing, still persistent problem. On AFEP side, we supported the European Observatory creation. We also support more widespread use of mediation schemes. Beatrice, you mentioned the Médiateur des Entreprises in France. I think for us it's a very good example of what could be done more broadly in each member state. Last year in France, we had 7 out of 10 files that came through the Mediator that were positive in finding an agreement in the end. It saves a lot of time. It is also less confrontational between companies, so it's always better. We see it as a good practice that could be spread around. And surprisingly, for a lot of our business counterparts in Europe, we were also in support of the creation of a national authority in each member state. Why? Because we do see it as an effective system, but also because we do have a very strong regime in France, and in the principle of a harmonized regime and a level playing field between companies in Europe, we saw it as a logic to better harmonize the system at the EU level. On the experience and maybe briefly on how it works in France exactly. So we have the authority, which is at the DGCCRF, so the Directorate General for Competition, Consumption and Fraud Repression, which is in charge of enforcement. It's directly attached to the Ministry of Economy and Finance, so it's not an independent authority. We have agents that have quite extensive powers to monitor compliance with the rules. They carry out analysis of the supplier accounts for a given supply invoices for a given period, so generally 1 year, and they weight the average payment period, and in the event of late payment, the amount of cash retention which resulted for suppliers. So at the end of the investigation, you have a draft decision and envisaged sanction that is shared with the targeted company, and then the company has 60 days to come back and justify invoice by invoice, which is a very time-consuming action. Each of the payment delays observed, and you have different explanations. You can also explain that some of the invoices that were included should not have been, for example, intra-group invoices, transaction with foreign companies, or those corresponding to credit notes. And you also, of course, can always demonstrate that there was a serious dispute related to the main performance of the contract, which explained the late payments. I would say you have also one part that is especially problematic for our companies given their size. It's what we call the principle of co-responsibility. So basically, it needs to show that the seller has required the invoice, but also that the buyer has also required it in case it was not sent. And in the DGCCRF checks that this principle has been respected, but many other companies in practice indicate that they cannot do it systematically in practice for a simple reason. We have companies that receive, for example, each month hundreds of thousands of invoices, and it's very complicated to make sure that there is a claim for each and single one of them and to check on a single invoice basis. The sanctions in France are quite high. They can be up to 2 million euros for legal entities, even 4 million in case of recidivism within 1 year. And you can actually go even higher because you have an addition of, let's say, of sanction per type of payment term. So, for example, you have a late payment regarding a transport term and then a payment thing. So you can go higher than 4 million euros. And then, as the report shows, you have a systematic publication of the sanction on the website of the authority in a more of a name and shame approach. What I think is important is to also remember that there is still the option of appeal in front of the authority, in front of the Ministry of Finance and Economy, but also after in front of an administrative court. So the authority does not completely take over the court. And we see it very important for us companies because you have a different relation when it comes to administrative authority versus a court or the ministry, where you can also have a more sensitive to be more sensitive to the economic situation of the company in question. I would say there is a need to remember that for the authority that they need to stay connected, and I think it was said that they need to stay connected with business life. There is different reason between delays. As you said, large companies still face a few issues, but in France right now, we actually have numbers that show it's doing better. We have increase in the large in share of large companies that pay before the expiry of the legal ceiling. It's for last year was plus 5%. But there is also a very different reason, and that's, I think, more where the role of AFEP comes in. It's to kind of explain why there's still delayed payment. And we identified 3 different types of factors. There is the delivery errors and invoices that are sent several days after the issuance. As regard large companies, we estimated that 1/3 of late payments can actually be explained by the delay between the date of issuance and the receipts within our members. And in the regulation proposal, it's a very positive point because it makes clear that the start day of payment deadline is on the date of receipt of the invoice. There is also the errors in invoices themselves. So we have problems with accountings that face the absence of purchase orders. You also have due dates that are not checked and whether it corresponds to the legal deadline. And then I would say the final problem is the internal control requirements themselves. So large companies, you have in the observatory still notes in France that there's still deficiency in accounting organizations that should be considered. And we see it as a positive note that electronic invoices is coming. I think it would be a big solution on our side. In France, it's going to be mandatory from September 2026 for large companies. And we see it as a good way forward in facilitating the processing and payment, and also, of course, to prevent litigation regarding the date of receipt itself. So I was very exhaustive, but I can, of course, go into more details on trends or reasoning behind delayed payments.
Thank you very much, Alex. No, it was very thorough and very good overview of the situation in France with respect also to the type of organization that you represent. I would like to just highlight one thing and then ask you a question if you could elaborate a little bit further. One thing that I find very interesting from your intervention is that as a representative of large organizations, you are in favor, of course, of data transparency. On the observatory, you have an excellent observatory running for many years. And the point that I really like in a way is understanding that the regime in France is very strong, and when you mention about the level playing field with all the member states in the EU, so it makes total sense to try to start getting closer in the way that this issue is tackled at the member states. So very good point. I wanted to ask you on the co-responsibility thing that you mentioned. I was curious to see if this is a big issue for your companies that you said receive many of them receive thousands of invoices per day. I wanted to know if what is the discussions with the public authority with the Minister of Economy on these respectives. Any discussion ongoing on how this could be improved? Because I understand that sometimes also a regulation and the way they are applied can also evolve depending on the bottlenecks, the issues that some of the actors may face. So if you can elaborate on that, if you have any insights on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so as you said, the thing is that we have to prove that the principle was respected. It's taken into account by the DGCCRF in its investigation. But because it's very complicated to do it systematically, we raise it as it's a problem also when in practice you have payment delays that are observed mainly based on its reason. When it comes to explaining it to administration, I think it's doing better, and there is an ongoing work right now actually within the observatory where AFEP is part, but also the DGCCRF itself, on trying to identify problems behind late payment within companies that could be that are not linked to deliberate actions from companies, but because of this type of situation that in practice the law is simply not applicable, or that there is still problems and everything. And then we try in that working group, which it has not published its reports yet, should be this year, but there is an identification of what would be the solution facing that specific problem. So it's also that work that is being done right now. It's of course broader than that only principle of co-responsibility, but for example, it addresses the invoices issues problem, the accounting, the how can you feed in good practices that companies are already implementing, and how can you try and make it broader use for companies of all sizes. And again, also that's a message we try and spread, including now for the regulation that is being negotiated, is that it's very different depending on the sector. And you have very different situations and culture of payment also depending on the sectors. So that's why we try and explain as best as we can to stakeholders.
Thank you very much, Alex. Thank you for this last part. You inform us that you have to leave at 11. So if you have to leave, I wanted to just thank you very much for your participation in case you have to rush to another meeting. So thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. So now I will move on to the last speaker today. We have with us Magdalena Zielinska from the Office of Competition and Consumer Protection of Poland. So Magdalena, from your perspective of the enforcement agency in Poland, could you tell us what is your approach to combating late payments? And also, we know that the Polish government introduced some legislative changes on enforcement measures. What was modified and why, if you could tell us? And also a little bit, if you could inform us what is about the soft call measures that you are applying. And that will be it. If you could contribute on those points. Thank you very much, Magdalena. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning. It's a pleasure to take part in this webinar. First of all, I find very interesting the findings of the report, especially these comparative ones. It's really very interesting and very impressive. What is about our approach? Our approach relies upon implementation of administrative sanctions, penalties. So it goes beyond what is laid down in the directive. Our system of fines, of penalties, is complementary to any other enforcement measures, especially used in civil proceedings, such as claims for payments, for recovery costs or interest in commercial transactions. Our experience shows that these measures using civil proceedings are insufficient. And our experience shows that creditors don't use them, as was shown in this thematic report. The Poland is on the bottom of this list in using such measures, and maybe that was the reason to implement this hard penalty measures. Since 2020, the president of our office is empowered to conduct so-called payment gridlocks proceedings and to impose penalties, but only in case of finding an infringement. An infringement, according to the Polish law, is the situation of excessive delays in payments, in which it means that in the period of 3 consecutive months, the total value of overdue payments amounts at least 2 million zloty, which is about 500,000 euros. This is our approach. Plus, we have got a maximum payment periods. We have introduced a maximum payment period, 60 days from the receipt of the invoice. And in B2B transactions in which SME is a creditor, this payment period cannot be extended, and any other relations could be extended, but must be agreed in a contract and cannot be grossly unfair. Our proceedings are conducted on the own initiative of our office. It means that they don't require an action taken by creditors, and the penalty is imposed when the infringement is established. If you ask about our previous regulation and the shortcomings of this regulation, I think that the main was the penalty waiver. In the case, in the situation when the debtor don't received its payments, and the amount of unreceived on-time payments is at least equal to the payments not performed by him on time, then it was the reason to waive the penalty. And as a result, in almost 100 cases, out of 100 cases, only 45 so estimate, yes, 45 in 45 the penalty was imposed, and that was the reason to change the regulation to make the ways, the methods of imposing fines and calculating fines more flexible. We know that this waiver was overused and by the parties to the proceedings, and didn't work well. And the second, what you ask, the second our change is connected with implementation of what we call a soft call. It means that our office can contact the company without initiation of the proceeding, and is empowered to note that a company has got late payments that are too high and may ask to improve the payment practices. And we have since this new regulation, we have sent about 100 such soft calls. The companies are free to respond, but most of them responded. Some of them ensured that they would improve their payment practices. Some of them said they didn't know that delays are so high. So we've got a very first evaluation of this preventive measure, because we should say that this is not punitive, it is a very preventive measures. And according to our evaluation, in almost 30% cases, the payment practices, in fact, has been improved. So it seems to be effective. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Magdalena. Sorry, do you want to add anything else?
For me?
Yes.
Well, I think that from our perspective, it's very important that these punitive measures should play with softer measures, preventive measures, and when they play together, it could be in the favor of combating late payments. This is my conclusion for today.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much, Magdalena. I wanted to ask you one follow-up question regarding the soft call. So you mentioned this can be considered a preventive measure, but this is exports, right? After the company has incurred in a late payment situation, instead of launching let's say the procedure, you may contact them to inform them of the situation so they can adjust. And what you referred that the initial assessment you have done has shown that these companies changed their payment practice, right? So in the future, they behave according to the payment terms that they have signed, right?
Yes, that's right. Sometimes, but not in all cases. So we can monitor. We are the tools to monitor payment behaviors of the companies, and we can verify these practices. As I said, companies are free to respond. Sometimes they explain their position. Sometimes there are temporary difficulties in which they are. So that all should be taken into account. And not always the initiation of the proceeding is the best way to solve the problem of late payments. Sometimes these preventive measures are enough. Mm-hmm. But there's no this soft call. We are entitled to use this tool, but it isn't a condition to initiate a proceeding. These are two separate ways for us.
Indeed. Thank you very much for your contribution, Magdalena. I see that we are running almost out of time. I was not able to read the Q&A. I saw there were 4 questions, but now there's only 1 remaining. Okay, I see everything was answered. So thank you very much, colleagues. I think that the topic could bring us the possibility to discuss even further, but we assigned the webinar 1 hour. We are just on time now, so I will not let's say ask further questions to the speakers today. So I would like to thank you very much, all of you, for your participation today. Is any other contribution from my colleagues that they would like to bring? I see, yes, Antonella, you raise your hand, please.
Yes, I just wanted to thank all the intervenants, because they were very, very interesting contributions. They really offered a lot of food for thought. I hope that it's also useful for the participants, and see how the role of these enforcement bodies can fill in a gap that is there. When answering some questions, I can see that there are repetitive unfair practices, recurrent practices, and they said, okay, why don't you go to court, or why don't? This is something that is not an option, as Magdalena also explained. I like very, very clearly when she said civil proceedings are insufficient and sometimes are not the right response. And I really liked the approach that they said we establish a dialogue with the company and understand why they cannot pay, the difficulties. I think this is something to take into account. I also like this preventive and pedagogical and educational approach that the enforcement bodies can have, because ultimately the purpose to combat late payment is by building a good payment culture, and it takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. But I think this is, to me, this kind of activities are a right way to start. I also like to thank Alix and Spiros for their views, and which is the point of view for companies. And it was very pleased to see that there is also a call from companies, from businesses, really to have something more than what we have now today, something that really address the issue of late payments in a more rapid way, and a way that helps maintaining also the relation with the counterpart. Thank you also to you, Iker, and to SEPS for organizing this debate today. It was a very interesting discussion from my side. I hope it was also for the participants. Thank you.
Indeed, yes. Thank you very much, Antonella, for your words. With this, I think we can close the session today. So again, thank you everybody for being here. I can announce that the next thematic report will be in invoicing. So we will soon finalize the report, and again, like this previous 2 thematic reports, we will organize a webinar to present the results and to have a discussion on the topic. So thank you again, everybody, and I wish you a very nice rest of the day. Bye. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.